listen, I've been vertically challenged my whole life, so I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for anybody out there, but it was funny. Welcome back to the show, you guys, and welcome back. A lot of things going on. Obviously, by the time you and I talk again Friday doing the Browns thing, we may have quite a few interesting things to talk about there, but this week didn't go quite the way you and I had discussed it when we did the breakdown Friday. But the Indians, this week, let's switch gears. Let's talk a little baseball. Tribe, and we talked about this late last week, and it was winds were swirling about picking up Brandon Moss. Indians finished that deal off yesterday and bring Brandon Moss into the fold, which I think, and Chris Antonetti spoke yesterday, for those of you guys that didn't hear the media avail that he did yesterday about that, and how, obviously it's clear that there's a glut of players in a similar role and position, so you would think that this is the beginning of perhaps a complementary move that comes on the backside, where they then in turn, whether it's a Carlos Santana, whether it's something involving Nick Swisher or David Murphy, there will be a complementary move most likely with this. But he also said, did Antonetti, that the focus now shifts to pitching, which is, again, something where I think you could use if you were going to move. And you guys know I love Carlos Santana. I don't want to move him, but if you were and could bring in a top quality, top shelf starting pitcher with a couple of years of control, then that's something that I highly could see the Indians doing now that they've kind of put themselves in a position with a stockpile of guys that all do the same thing.
You're right. The Indians, they really have put themselves in a very good bargaining position. It's not a great position right now to go out onto the field and play, because you've got, like you said, people stockpiled playing the same position. But, yeah, I really would not like to see them trade Carlos Santana unless, they get some really eye-popping starting pitcher and form a nice, great 1-2 punch with Kluber, and then that might, change my mind a little bit. But on paper, I really would love to see them not get rid of Santana, maybe, get rid of David Murphy and free up a little bit of money to sign a good pitcher. That way you wouldn't really have to give up anybody except for Murphy, of course. So there's a lot of different ways it could go. I think getting rid of Santana, you'd have to get a real superstar pitcher. But I really love this trade for Moss. I know you said some people are kind of on the fence, but I think that this was really a great deal. I've been railing on poor Billy Beane in Oakland for the last several months about trading all these power hitters for essentially nothing, and then he does it for us. It's like, thank you. It's like, if he's going to keep doing this, he might as well do it in the Indians' favor, and that's exactly what he did, trading Cespedes and Donaldson and now Moss, all of whom hit more than 20 homers last year. It's almost like they're allergic to power hitters down there at this point.
I mean, basically what they've done, and you can see it here in the moves that Billy Beane has made, is they've reached a point where the guys, and I mentioned that about Donaldson last week when we were talking about how that was a guy who, if you go 3-4 years back in the trading cycle, which is kind of how that works for each, it's like a larvae to a fly, it's the cycle of life there. Mm-hmm. And when you go back, you saw how Donaldson and then became the guy sent out. Same thing here with Moss. You kind of got the back end of that 3 or 4 year cycle where these were the guys that were brought in a few years ago for the names, for the bigger ticket guys. These were the prospects brought in that became the young core for Oakland for a couple of years, and now they've basically decided, being Billy Beane in Oakland, that we've reached maximum value out of these guys here, so now we're going to move them while they may still have a year or two of value left, or they still may have some juice, or more than that in some cases, but we've maximized our return off of these guys. So now the cycle starts again, and here you see it as they're shipping out all of those guys there and kind of rebuilding around the ones that they've redesigned as their new core.
Yeah, well, see, what happens is I'm trying to get inside Billy B's head. He's got a situation
Good
where
luck.
he's stuck in this old, yeah, really good luck. He's stuck in this old ballpark. He's not getting himself a really, nice new ball field like, Jacobs Field was 20 years ago, or, there haven't been a whole lot of places that have opened recently, but, the ballpark is not generating any excitement or any revenue. So, like you said, these guys start to get to the point where they're going to eventually command some money, and he's got to get rid of them, because what he thinks is, he thinks that he can assemble a team of unknowns and young guys and upcoming guys and make the playoffs. That's where the disconnect is. He feels like if you made the playoffs, it's a successful season. But as you see last year, they did squeak into the playoffs, but there was no possible way that team was going to get to the World Series. So if that's always going to be your goal, a team that's cheap and can maybe barely get into the playoffs, but you never really have the huge, strong group that's going to possibly challenge for the World Series, what's the point?
You know what, though? And I'm just playing devil's advocate. What you just said has have empty Indians fans look at the Indians. Exactly. I mean, as the words are coming out of your mouth, I'm going, Nick, Don, you know how many of these guys send me comments every day on Facebook that parrot, except they just replace Oakland with the Indians. That's just funny because that's almost word for word. The ones that are on that side of the fence is that the Indians are content. And I'm not even trying to take the conversation this way right now, but the formula, be good enough to get you in the conversation and hope that you can get that core strong enough for a couple of years that you can be a top team in that limited window that you have.
Right, but the difference is that the A's aren't going to do what the Indians did and say, okay, we're going to commit this money to Michael Bourne, we're going to commit to Nick Fisher, we're going to sign these kids, we're going to sign our young veterans. See, if Oakland had done what Cleveland had done, they would have taken guys like Donaldson, guys like Moss, and would have signed them to multi-year contracts like we did with Kipnis and Yan Gomes and build those as the cornerstones of your team. And, that's how you do possibly build a team that can get somewhere, because then once you've got a team of young veterans that have some kind of cost control, then you can add maybe one or two guys to put you over the top. And when you have that kind of a team, you do have a chance of making to the World Series, like the Royals did, because, they had pretty much that same formula. They made the trade for James Shields, and it helped really to get them there. They didn't win it all, but they possibly could have won it all. But, so it's really two different formulas there. And, the Indians are doing the best they can as far as working with their resources. And I like what they did with Moss. And I think that the Moss trade, I think this really takes a lot of pressure off them, because they didn't trade any of their starting pitching. And now that you've got Moss in the fold with that, 25 home run, pop, then it takes the pressure off of, now we have to rely on Swisher. I mean, if Swisher comes back and does anything, that's good. I mean, you don't have to have Nick Swisher come back and completely to full form. If you can possibly train him and be like a magician and make him disappear, that'd be one thing. But you're not relying on Swisher being the number 4 or 5 hitter and just returning their physical shape, because I don't see that happening. And also, it takes the pressure off. Well, what do we do with Lance Chisenhall? Do we move him? Do we move him to right field? Do we try to get somebody else at third base? I think at this point, now that you've got your power bat, you can let Chisenhall stay where he is and just try to do a little more of the same and maybe get a little better next year.
Now, first off, out of what you just said there, I don't rely on Nick Swisher to be my number 9 hitter. I'm just going to tell you that right now. So be careful when you use the word you. I don't rely on Nick Swisher to do anything, but some people may. But I'm joking. See, I got to be careful. We still got a lot of show left here. I don't want to jinx it messing with Nick Swisher, but I'm just saying. Here's the thing, devil's advocate, I will say with Moss, and I like the trade because you didn't give up much. You gave up a prospect while he was just moved. Baseball America had just moved him into the Indians' top 10 prospects. He had several blocks in front of him to get where he needed to get. So he was several steps removed from the next level. I do believe they dealt from a position there where it doesn't matter. That doesn't hurt them per se. I liked Dan Wismar's comparison yesterday to Cord Phelps. That was a decent one for Wendell. So I don't mind that. But I don't also I can't go, well, the Indians have solved the problem with power. And because here's my thing with Moss. I'm going to throw two things at you. Number one, even without the injury, all of his numbers have trended downward. He has regressed, if you want to use the Brian Hoyer term. He has regressed over a couple of years. Not terribly. I'm just saying they have trended downward. That's a thing of caution. But, hey, a lot of players go up and down. But the injury, people go, well, but the injury, and they toss it to the side. That is a hip surgery. That's a labrum deal. That is... Some players can come back from it, but I'm just saying your hips are the source of your power. So that gives me pause. I don't care that he's $7 million. I'm not worried about the salary or anything of that. I hope that it is as seamless as everybody wants to make it sound, that he returns to the field as effective as we just said about Nick Swisher. It's easy to go, hey, Indians just signed a guy who hit 24 home runs and 90 RBIs last year. Okay, that's great. Then we saw what happened. So you can sign a guy who did last year all you want, but what is he going to do next year? And I do hope he's able to recover, but it does give me pause that it's an injury in a source of power from the body in a player who's a power hitter.
Well, I think that's a legitimate concern, but you got to think that the Indians kicked the tires enough on him to say that this isn't going to be a career-threatening or career-ending injury, and he should be able to make it back from there. I'm going to kind of take that leap of faith along with the Indians, considering they went ahead and made this deal and didn't come up with a guy who's just going to be a total lemon and just completely fall apart from a physical standpoint. But the one thing that I like about this is considering that Moss hit 30 home runs in 2013 and then 25 more last year. And he's like, I was at home in Oakland, and that's really kind of a terrible park for hitters. You have to clobber the ball just to get it out of there. And, there's also a lot of foul territory, which is always a problem for hitters in Oakland. A lot of area where balls that would be into the stands get swallowed up for outs. So anti-Coors Field that he's been playing at, you could almost call it O'Doul's Field. But he, now he's going to be in a place where he's not going to be playing there except for just a few games a year. And I think that's really going to help him because he's, going to be going to a lot more of the hitter's park.
You're listening to the Sports Fix. J-Rock, Jeff Gorman talking here about the Indians' latest moves. And I got to say, Ron Graham's running the Twitter real quick, Jeff. And as we're talking, he's live tweeting our conversation here across which, by the way, you guys can, of course, always be a part of the conversation. Just tweet at the Sports Fix CLE and follow us there. But Ed Carroll on Twitter got a little ticked at us here, said Moneyball is the name of a book, not a baseball strategy. And I said, yeah, but you know what? The average listener knows exactly what we mean, one word, when we say Moneyball. So I fully enjoy a more technically advanced technical conversation that we can have off the air. But this, I get a kick out of that. Obviously, they're joking on Twitter about that right there. But hey, I want to talk not just Indians, and obviously we mentioned there'll probably be some complimentary moves to follow this, but the division as well. Talking about complimentary moves and the Chicago White Sox, you and I mentioned last week when we talked, as they continue to try to improve and say, hey, it's not just Cleveland and Oakland and Detroit. This is a division. And man, I'll tell you, here we go, man. It's a 4-horse race now because Chicago keeps adding to their team. Speaking of Oakland, as they continue to deal assets and deal players, they just picked up Samardzija last year in that trade you and I were talking about, and now they send him out to the Chicago White Sox as the White Sox pick up Samardzija, and they sign David Robertson in free agency.
Yes, that was a big money deal, literally and figuratively. That just really shows that the White Sox are just jumping right in there. It's interesting considering how competitive that year, the division was this past year with the Tigers and the Royals and the Indians. The White Sox still, they see that the Tigers could be losing Max Scherzer. They see that the Royals could be losing, James Shields, and they're kind of smelling blood and saying, we're going to spend some money. We're going to jump right into this thing and maybe surprise some people because, they went out and signed Adam LaRoche to go with, Jose Abreu. So they got a couple of good power hitters there, especially with Konerko retiring. And then, now they're picking up Samardzija to go with, Chris Sale and Jose Quintana. Now that's like a pretty good-looking rotation that they've got. And then, we talked about Zach Duke joining the bullpen because that was really one of their weaknesses was the bullpen. Now they've shorted up with Zach Duke and Robertson now, getting the Yankees closer. So the White Sox, they're just, I'd say they've had one of the best off seasons so far, and it's very far from being over. But the White Sox are making a lot of noise, and unfortunately, I think that's going to translate to the field next year. I think the White Sox are going to be kind of dangerous. I wouldn't have even said that